Karibu IFAB Online.
Bienvenidos a IFAB Online.
Welcome to IFAB Online.
Hello and welcome everybody to this wonderful session where we'll be talking about fundraising for North America from Africa. And my name is Ligia Peña. I will be your moderator for this panel, and I'm very excited to be here. I'm a fundraising veteran of 20 years. I started fundraising actually when I was quite young, but became a professional fundraiser in 2002. I've held many positions here in Montreal in different organizations until I went international, and for the last 4.5 years, I was the Global Legacy Manager at Greenpeace International. And since July 2020, I've been consulting at my own firm called Globetrotting Fundraiser, where I specialize in legacy fundraising. I'm very, very excited to have here as part of this panel two wonderful and extremely experienced fundraisers. We've got Mike and Lucy, and I would love to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So Mike, would you like to go first?
My name is Mike Michelwa. I operate from Kenya in East Africa, and I am a fundraising strategist. I've actually been involved in resource mobilization or fundraising for the last 30 years or so. I've served on many boards in Africa and beyond. I've also worked for several organizations, including the World Fair Trade Organization that focuses on fair trade. But I'm also an author, having written several titles myself, and those focused on fundraising have included The Fundraiser, The Art of Organizing Special Events, The Fundraising Campaign, Organizing Successful Fundraising Campaigns, Resource Mobilization Strategy, Developing Strategies That Work. But I've also had the privilege to contribute to other international books with other authors, including the award-winning Global Fundraising, How the World is Changing the Rules of Philanthropy, Diversity and Philanthropy, again, Expanding the Circle of Giving, which is another award-winning book. And the most recent was Best Global NGO Governance Practices. So I'm happy to be speaking to you on IFAB Online. Thank you.
Well, I'm Lucy Blythe. I run a consultancy called Philia International. I have been involved in fundraising in one way or another since the 1980s, when I ran fundraising for an art museum in the States. Since then, I've done many things. You can look at my LinkedIn profile if you want to look at the rest of it, but I've been a fundraiser, I've been a charity chief executive, I've been a partner in a headhunting firm, and most recently, for the last 12 or so years, I've been consulting in the nonprofit world, mainly inspired by the need for board development and leadership development, where I think the best fundraising has a lot of support. I have a particular interest in Africa, and so I've had a lot to do with some organizations there. But Mike is the real expert here, so I hope he has the most time. And the area I'm most interested in, of course, is leadership and getting the networks in place for this.
Excellent. Welcome. Welcome you both. So I think, Lucy, you wanted to start off with, you're going to do a brief presentation on what your experience has been and what you've observed while working with organizations in Africa and high net worth individuals in Africa.
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting space. And I think perhaps just to give some context for people who haven't worked much with organizations on the continent, is just for people to remember that it's a continent of 54 countries, many distinct regions. According to linguists, there are over 2,000 languages spoken on the continent, including the major post-colonial languages, English, French, and Portuguese. And many of the countries are quite wealthy in themselves. Where that wealth goes is one of the interesting questions, but there are growing numbers of high net worth individuals and also a growing middle class across the continent. So this slide just shows the growth in high net worth individuals on the continent, which is looks really promising for those who are interested in fundraising from major donors on the continent. But that said, I think there's some caveats that people really need to keep in mind. Okay, so there are people of wealth on the continent, obviously, and there are growing numbers of them. But there are a number of things to keep in mind if you are looking at these prospects. One is that given the multiple needs on the continent, and if I can generalize a bit, culturally, Africans are incredibly generous and they give to many purposes. Like everywhere else in the world, people give to people they know, to organizations they know, to communities and countries where they have a connection. So research is incredibly important to do before you enter this market. The ways in which people give are, again, similar in some ways and different in others. And I think Mike will probably speak more to those specifics. But the wealthy people on the continent often set up their own foundations. You'll probably know some of the better known ones, the Dangote Foundation, and a number of others we'll mention during this session. They are often driven by particular interests like other foundations, many of which have religious connections. For instance, the Higher Life Foundation, set up by the Masiyiwas in Zimbabwe, driven really by Christian commitments. And one of the really interesting things about them is that, and this is a general trend of foundations, is that they are working in partnership with the charity who works on the ground, and that's World Vision. And I think partnerships are something really interesting to think about if you are fundraising on the continent, is being able to build that ecosystem of support so that you can have greater impact. And so that you can show the donor that they can have greater impact through you. So like donors in any other country, a lot of the money on the high end of giving is to higher education, health, and to some extent to arts and culture. So for instance, there is a gallery in the US at a prestigious university that was given by an African philanthropist, and it's named after him. There are cancer charities who've been able to secure large gifts and other things that have a universal appeal. But in terms of trying to raise community funds from Africans for the North American continent, I think you'd have to have a really, really good pitch and connection in order to make that work. A few trends that I've observed. One I mentioned already, partnerships. Some funders are particularly trying to drive this. There's one called Synergos, who are trying to drive something they call bridging leadership. And that is to try to encourage other donors to work with them to address social issues by, again, building this ecosystem with government support, business support, foundation support, and civil society and community-based groups, so that they can have the most impact in the most efficient way, rather than what has happened often in the past, which is a lot of ad hocery and trying to address little things where there are many other things that influence it and which undermine the efforts of the well-meaning donors in that one place. Also, I think increasingly, the major donors on the continent are aware of global conversations, and like many other global donors, are taking the Sustainable Development Goal frame for their giving. So if you can communicate your purpose and your cause and your mission and your vision with an SDG lens, that really helps you fit with some of the donor objectives and grant-making practices. Another thing to really consider is the balance that needs to be struck between compliance and agility. And this has been particularly evident in the time of COVID, when donors are trying to respond quickly to the needs. And they are trying to make sure they're doing their due diligence, but also be able to act quickly. And this is where these facilitation organizations like Chapel in York, like CAF or CAF South Africa, or the King Baoduan Foundation can help, because they do the due diligence for the donor, ensuring that the cause supported is legitimate, financially sound, et cetera, and meets the regulatory requirements in their jurisdiction. One thing to keep in mind when you're doing your research on African donors is, who are they? Where do they come from? Where are they already giving? What is the political context in the jurisdiction where they live, from which they are earning the money that they are giving away, or where that money came from? And also, what are the needs on the ground where they are, either where they live or where they're from, or where the source of their wealth is? Because there are many African donors who, depending on their circumstances, might find it very difficult politically to give outside their country or outside the continent. I won't name any names, but for instance, I know of one major donor in a Southern African country who would find it very difficult to give outside their country, because it would make it more difficult on the ground for them. And there are very evident local needs. And so it's very difficult to justify sometimes putting any significant amount of money outside the country when there are evident needs in the country. Which also makes me think about the growing trend towards venture philanthropy and social investment. Again, people picking up on global conversations are looking at how they can make their investments make a difference, and also looking at developing the economies of African countries. So because Africa has the largest population of young people, that's a terrific opportunity for economic development and for solving problems on the continent and elsewhere. Someone made a joke, but it wasn't really a joke, about sending African election observers to other countries because they have experience dealing with elections. And there's some really good election practices on the continent, for instance. Well, same with philanthropy. And actually the rest of the world could learn a lot from the way Africans give, very much, very widely.
Fabulous. Thank you, Lucy. That was really insightful and very helpful. Thank you. So Mike, it's your turn. So do you want to dig in as someone from Kenya and knows the continent extensively?
Thank you, Ligia. Fundraising in Africa is a topic I'm passionate about. In fact, fundraising across the world. And there's so much to say about this continent, because people often think it's one big landmass. And like Lucy insinuated or explained, it's actually 54 countries. And again, heavily influenced by our colonial past. So if you come back to East Africa, where I'm based, the main language is English in most of the countries. But again, there's Rwanda and Burundi, for example, that speaks French. There's Djibouti, if you look at the Horn of Africa, that speaks French. The Ethiopians have their own long history and proud history, so they speak more of Amhara amongst others. Yeah, there's the southern part of the country that is dominated by English, Central Africa that is English and French, West Africa that is largely French, but again, Nigerians, and there are very many Nigerians, 180 million of them, and the Ghanaians and those in the Gambia that speak English. And then you go to the north of the country that is largely English. So even when we go into meetings, we need translators to speak to each other. Yeah, because again, I haven't even mentioned that there's Portuguese in Angola and Mozambique. Yeah, and that has made, again, it very difficult to communicate with each other whenever we meet. But also the cost of transport is often, for example, it's cheaper for me to go to Europe, to the UK. It'll cost me as much to go to the US as it'll cost me to move from Kenya to West Africa. But having said that, it influences a lot the kind of resources we get, because resource mobilization on the continent has largely, as far as non-profits are concerned, been dominated by institutional funding. And it's only in the last decade that you're beginning to see NGOs or non-profits begin to benefit from funding from individuals. And largely because the kind of institutional non-profits that we have are actually Western in orientation. So what we call the non-governmental organizations and the societies, the companies limited by guarantee, are largely alien in or Western in orientation, came in the 60s, 70s as Save the Children, Plan and others were trying, and Oxfam were trying to get development going on the continent. But the community-based organization, the faith-based organization, are a bit closer to what we have. And interestingly, again, because of our colonial mindset, is we tend to look at non-profit organizations, especially the international and non-governmental organizations and the bigger national ones, as being donors in their own right. So whenever there is an appeal for funds, then people appeal to the government, they'll appeal to donors, and appeal to NGOs. And that has actually worked as a stumbling block to many organizations on the continent, because people think that these NGOs should be helping them, not the other way around. But there are, of course, those that have been able to pass that barrier. Like one good example, for example, is the Red Cross, especially the Kenyan Red Cross, that has raised lots of money over the years, simply because then people see them in action all the time and tend to treat them more like a nonprofit, like a local organization, than they would an ING or anything else. But having said that, I want to note that, again, by nature, Africans are extremely generous. I mean, we tend to feel that those in Europe will, or the US, and other Western countries will give out of surplus. But in Africa, we say we share what we have. So in Africa, that sense of community, of giving is always there. And you'll always be given, even if you don't have much. So that whole thing about sharing informs a lot of our giving and our generosity. And we tend to give and forget. So it's extremely difficult finding an African who can tell you how much they've given in any period of time, because then you give and you move on. So while it might be easier to get a Westerner who can put down what they've given, maybe an American, because again, they can get tax breaks, here is people struggle. And even when you ask them, they'll be coming back to you 2 weeks, 3 weeks later and saying, Mike, I forgot that I belong to this group and we support orphans, or I gave for this other thing. And that is something that you need to keep in mind. And especially because then when it comes then to the kind of giving in the West, where you can recruit donors, especially when you're looking at individual donors to give you on a monthly basis, or an annual basis. In Africa, because we are struggling with so many particular things at any one time, and especially with the advent of mobile phones and mobile money, technically you can't hide, is you'll wake up in the morning and there's an appeal that comes in, could be social in need, it couldn't be institutional, it might be from an individual needing support, could be from an institution needing support. But at any one time, you'll be giving out money that is unbudgeted. And on average, we estimate that an African will give out 30 to 40% of their income in every year. They tend to be very emotional. So if they're attached emotionally, they'll give. So they'll give to an orphan out there who's been unable to go out to higher education because they saw the story and it moved them on media, yet they've not even finished paying the school fees for their own kids. The other thing to notice again is Africa is diverse. Again, Lucy mentioned the different communities. In my own country, there are more than 44 different tribes. But again, if you undo the clustering that was done by the British when they ruled, like my own community has another 17 sub-tribes, you end up with more than 100. If I get into neighboring Tanzania, there are more than 200 communities. You get to Cameroon, there are another 200 plus communities, Nigeria. So huge numbers of different communities that actually coexist. But also then there are the Asians and the Indians in East Africa, the Lebanese again in West Africa. There's still again the Europeans who stayed it behind and became citizens. And each of these give differently. So if I look at mobile money, the African is more likely to give you money through the famous M-Pesa, mobile giving if you have a campaign. But you'll tend to see then many of the Asians, especially in East Africa, will tend to give through their community groups, social groups, temples. So rarely will they use M-Pesa to send you money for giving. So those are again things to keep in mind. They don't give much to NGOs because they believe again NGOs are rich. Yeah, again, a colonial mindset, and we're seeing the AMREFs are breaking through, and a few other smaller charities have been able to get through. But it also brings an interesting perspective, because then many of the charities here have actually been used to getting big money. So you go to USAID, you get $500,000, $200,000, $1 million. You get it from the DFID. Yeah, you get it from the Canadians, you get it from SIDA Sweden, and so on. So we've become a bit complacent about going out and raising small amounts of money from individuals, because it is easier than writing a proposal and getting a chunk. So many of the nonprofits in the continent are being forced to get in that way. Yeah, they're being forced then, because of declining funding that is coming from the traditional European, American, and Western base, is they're being forced to look for a domestic resource mobilization as an alternative to what they've been used to getting, but it's been more or less reluctant. When you look at the courses they give to, of course, education runs fast. And it's largely based on the fact that we believe that if a child gets an education, then it opens them to more opportunities out there. So if you're raising money in Africa, yeah, for anything in the US or elsewhere, then education will still be the thing that comes first, followed by health. Then those other things then come in later. But keeping in mind, again, some of the other trends in a philanthropic landscape, is you find there's been increased giving by companies, again, influenced by corporate social responsibility practices that have been happening largely in the West. So more companies are giving, and many companies have now actually launched foundations that are giving. And it's becoming more complex again, because some of these foundations, if you look like at Safaricom, that came up with a famous M-Pesa, is it gives money from its own reserves, but also has money that it gives from Vodacom, yeah, in the UK. If you look at Wings to Fly, for example, that is run by Equity Bank, also gets quite a bit of money, yeah, $5 million or so from MasterCard Foundation. And we are seeing a lot of clustering of monies around from external foundations, yeah, to support the priorities or the kind of interest that local foundations have. Middle class Kenyans, yeah, Nigerians, South Africans, amongst others are giving. Yeah, and interestingly, a new trend that has been building over the last half decade or so has been then the number of high net worth individuals in the continent, especially the Nigerians. Yeah, so the Dangotes, the Tony Elemelus, the T.Y. Danjumas and others, yeah, who are giving money to causes outside their mother countries. The same thing we're seeing with Tribe Masiwiwa, for example, in Zimbabwe, yeah, or the Francois van Neerkaks in South Africa. Again, this is following the fact that you're seeing many African businesses becoming multinationals in their own right. So they started off in Ghana or Nigeria or South Africa, but they've been looking for business across the continent. And as they've expanded across the continent, then you've had a situation where their CSR or their charitable activities have also been growing in order to back up those business activities. And mobile money has been interesting, because mobile money then has enabled people to give across borders. And very interestingly, I mentioned I'm based in Kenya, but I can give to any social cause, even if I'm in Uganda, I'm in Rwanda, I'm in Tanzania, I'm in South Africa. Yes, so long as then I'm connected to the Safaricom or Vodacom network, is I'll be able then to give to a cause in Kenya, even if I'm not in Kenya. I'll be able to use my mobile phone to access my bank account, download money to give to a cause that is not there. Yeah, and this again is an interesting development, because it's largely based, and for us, if I talk about crowdfunding, yeah, because crowdfunding again has become quite the rage, yeah, in the resource mobilization world or the fundraising landscape, is for us then traditionally we've always given money through what we call the Harambee system, which is coming together. So for us then, crowdfunding is simply Harambee online. Yeah, so mobile money has simply come in to support that resource mobilization giving, in that I don't have to physically go into a hall to give. but I can give from wherever I am. So whichever country I am, so long as I've got access, then I'll be able to use my mobile money platform, whatever exists in that country, to be able to give. And this again will be supported by social media. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of use of social media, especially things like WhatsApp has been very fundamental because it's simple and reaches far more people. But again, you had Facebook Live. So there's a friend of mine again, who runs a foundation, again, raises easily $1 million or more using his Facebook contacts with 160,000 followers as of August last year. Yes, the Twitters and others are also helping. Special events have been another growing area. So you have events like the Rhino Charge that is held in Kenya that did 1.8 million in 2018. Mata Heart Run, another Kenyan event that raises money for children with heart conditions. They were targeting 200 million last year. The year before they did 200 million shillings or $2 million. They did $1.56 million in the year before, that was 2018. So again, fundraisers, the special events are really growing as another area in which money is raised. Just picking up again on what Lucy had said, yeah, remember again, the African Development Bank had done a study in 2010, and it told us the middle class in Africa would be 313 million strong. Yeah, it was 313 million strong in 2010, but this was actually going to grow to 1.6 billion people in 2060. Yeah, so that has been attracting again a lot of businesses to the continent because people see this huge group of young people, and most of our population actually is less than 35 years old. Many countries in Africa have 70% or more of their population consisting of people that are 35 years or less. So huge opportunity then for people to come in. Although interestingly, even though, yes, we mentioned there are all those high net worth individuals that again, Lucy had mentioned, the Donald Gordons, yeah, who've given out 50 million, Mark Shuttleworth, South Africa, 20 million, the Manu Chandarias that gave $1.2 million every year, the Meralis again from Kenya, 1.2 million, the James Mwangis, 1.2 million, and many others. The late Reginald Mengi in Tanzania used to give $1 million or so per year, yeah, and a whole range of Nigerians. Is we tend to feel that most of the people who tend to give to good are actually middle-class Africans. So for us, then our experience has been the richer people tend to be stingier, probably because then they take a lot of loans for their business. But those who tend to give are actually those in the lower part of the income chain. Yeah, coming down to ways they give, a lot of it is through cash, so either actual cash or mobile money, occasionally bank deposit, but mobile money is by far the most popular if you're not having a physical event. Yeah, credit card use has been growing, but has really been outpaced by mobile money. There's a bit of in-kind giving, which again is harder to track because Africans don't tend to track that. A lot of the money still goes to individuals in need for a whole range of things. So education, for things like health, it could be times of distress like funerals. So a lot of it is still individually based, followed by faith-based organizations, yes, so or religious institutions. So churches, mosques, and the charities they support, yeah, that's a huge thing. So for the big ones, you'll find the security trucks from Wells Fargo or Jiffy or 4S doing 4, 5, 6 trips per day, taking the money from the religious institution to the bank because there's so much money being given to those organizations right now. Yeah, schools, health institutions that are generally community infrastructure, another huge beneficiary. NGOs, INGOs, we say, are only learning how to give and developing their techniques to give. And many of them, especially the NGOs, are having then to adapt their approaches to suit an African landscape because those that try usually use approaches that are more best left to Europe. So I'll end by maybe mentioning a few points that you need to keep in mind. If you're going to be raising money from this continent, some of the things you need to do, one is remember Africans are emotional. Yeah, so your cause has to be able then to reach out and touch their hearts. If you can appeal to their hearts, then you'll open up their wallets and purses. Secondly, is Africans again give differently from those in the US. Yeah, so whether you're raising money for a cause in Africa or you're raising it to support a cause in the US, is remember then it'll be very difficult getting an African who'll give you money every month. Because for them then is, there are two aspects that influence that. One is it looks like a debt. So if I have to keep on sending you money every month, it's like I'm paying a debt, and that tends to stress me out. But secondly, because they believe in a concept of fairness and they're dealing with so many different appeals for help, is they have the way of thinking that says, let me deal with 1 or 2 appeals this month. Next month, I'll support something else. The next month, I'll pick up a different appeal. So you're kind of working your way down a list. Yeah. So people like Red Cross who've done pretty well, what they've done is they've maintained a database. And whenever there's a need for an appeal, like a farming appeal, when people are starving or there's another calamity, is they'll send out appeal across their networks, traditional social media, and people will give, and then they'll give those contacts a rest for a year or 2 before coming up with another appeal to follow up. Another thing to remember is education and health will be very popular causes on this continent. And it's not just here. I think I've seen it also in Asia, where a lot of the rich people also give to education and health. Yeah, but it'll be more difficult raising money for things like environment, unless then, okay, there's been a bit of concerns over climate change. So it's easier getting money to support then tree planting or water conservation than it was in the past. But again, animals then have problems. So even when we've had challenges, for example, even back home with poaching of elephants or lions, people then think it's important, but they feel then assisting orphans, assisting poor, assisting people living with disabilities is much more important. So in the list of priorities, they'd rather support things that deal with people. So education, health, poverty, yeah, people living with disabilities, the elderly, then come down to other causes after that. So if you're going to be raising money for a cause in the US, you need to remember that, yeah, that it needs to be connected to causes that they actually believe in. It needs to be emotional, and it's not going to be, yeah, irregular. It's not going to be regular giving. South Africa is a different market, and by extension, then Mauritius, because in South Africa and Mauritius, then companies are bound to give by law. Yeah, so they must give money to good causes by law. Yeah, and that again becomes tax deductible. But that's not the same in other countries where they don't necessarily get tax exemption. Or then places like Kenya, it's just a big nightmare, yeah, to have those exemptions actualized. So many of those corporates don't actually aggressively follow them up. Yeah, but again, like Lucy said, is many of them will be giving for local needs because they believe there are a lot of local needs that need to be looked at. And many of them are linked to business interests. So even though they'll never agree or state that they're giving because of, business benefits, so be it strengthening their brand name, yeah, and so on, that is a strong motivation. So they'll not give easily to a US thing unless they see the link that is coming in. And we mentioned like the African entrepreneurs and businesses that have been going out to different countries, the banking sector, insurance, ICT. We're seeing a lot of then corporate money following those lines going out. Then a few other things I'll say with that is a lot of corporates again have started foundations. And like I mentioned earlier, is many have realized that they can use those foundations also to raise money from other companies that don't want to have their own, especially those that are foreign-based, yeah, and want to ride their network, but also those in which they have relationships. So the Safaricom I mentioned, yeah, is partly owned by Vodacom. Equity Bank, yeah, also offers financial services for MasterCard Foundation or for MasterCard. So the foundation link then makes sense for them. Yeah, people tend to give again for humanitarian causes. And we've given money when Japan had that huge problem with the tsunami that affected their nuclear plants and everything. I mean, Kenyans made a donation to them. We donated to Haiti when it had problems. So there's a lot of money going out, some quietly that you never know about. And I believe though it'll be a bit challenging, it is still possible with the right cause to be able to raise money for something in the US from the African setting. Yeah, and that will especially apply to better educated citizens, yeah, who consider themselves, especially the youth, yeah, who consider themselves as being world citizens. So they would be giving, but if I'm giving to the US, yeah, and I like the cause, I'll be giving it so it gives me a bit also bragging rights, yeah, to say, you know, I also donate to this organization in the US, also donate to this cause in the US. So the kind of triggers and drivers that you'll be appealing to will be different. But let me leave it there for now, Legia, then we'll be able then to pick up a bit later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So many nuggets of wisdom in this. It's hard to wrap your head around so much. And I really love what you said, like in Western countries, it's more, the approach is more give what you can, whereas in the continent, in the African continent, is more give what you have. And it's just like, I had to write it down because that's such a very clear and distinct distinction between the two, I guess, the philosophy of giving between the two regions, I suppose, which is a great segue. And you touched on this a little bit by talking so much about mobile money and so on. So I wanted you to sort of have a bit of a conversation about the biggest differences between, at least from what you've observed, of what fundraising is between the African continent and North America, Western countries, because you've touched on many of them, Mike, but Lucy as well, from a high value perspective, what have been some of the, biggest differences in terms of channels, techniques, approaches, etc., that fundraisers who are having to fundraise out of Africa for North America or vice versa should be mindful of in order to not land flat on their face?
In Africa, still also the giving, people give money to people. So there are many times I'll give money because someone I know, either a friend or a peer, ex-classmate, or someone just asked me. Yeah. So there are times I'll give for a cause, not because I fully believe in that cause. Yeah. But because then the person on the other side is someone I respected, I liked, told me to give, and I gave out for it. Yeah. Sometimes it's that plus the nature of the cause that comes up that drives me. There's a lot of, again, media-driven giving that was there. When we were growing up, I mean, and if I pick my parents, who are typical of many African parents out there who grew up in rural areas, is many of those people were extremely generous. I mean, they would give money. There's a lot of money that would always be going back to rural areas, to all kinds of characters. And sometimes you look in and see, look at this guy who's an alcoholic, or look at this guy who's, but you see, you might be seeing someone who has developed problems, maybe gone into alcoholism. Yeah, but to your father, this is a childhood friend. So when they were young, they crossed over, went and stole mangoes together from the neighbor's tree, or they swam naked in some stream somewhere. So those bonds are there. Yeah, but sense of family, again, the African sense of family is very interesting. And I remember again when I started working many years ago, and one of the members of staff, he was a driver, lost his mother. So he came and told us, look, I've lost our mother, and everyone was very sympathetic because moms are special. And we all donated. That was a march out here. And in August, he comes back and he says, my mother is dead. And everyone turns back and says, look, but your mother died in March. Yeah, no, he says, no, that was the big mother. Yeah, the mother now who's died is a small mother. Yeah, because in Africa, all your mother's sisters are your mothers. So her elder sister is your big mother. Your younger sister is the small mother. So you never have a vacuum of mothers. So long as your aunties are there, they're all mothers. Your brothers, father's brothers, all your fathers. Your cousins are all brothers. So you have to ask, is it cousin, brother from the same mother, brother from the stepmother, or yeah? But it is that whole thing that means that we grew up with many relatives in the home, that it was the educated people out there. Yeah, so the educated cousins and dealt with health things and others, because there's all that sense of community that continues today. But with many of us who are now growing up in urban areas, those are weakening. Those links are weakening. We are busier. We don't socialize as much. And what's happening is the media is driving us. So this story comes in and we look at this boy who passed very well and has had to repeat 2 classes because his parents can't take him to the next grade, and we sympathize and we pull out our phones and we send money by phone to the pay bill. Yeah. And we look out next time, there's a lady who's cooking stones so that she can give it to her kids and cheat them that is soup because she's so poor, and we get enraged and we are sympathetic and we give. So the media is driving a lot of that. Social media, yeah, again, has become another major thing. Again, it's all driven by emotion, yeah, and the way you present it, there'll be issues, and these are very relevant to anyone raising from the US. If you come in and you want to raise money for children, because we have a lot of issues of sexual abuse that are coming up again as our cultures have changed. We never used to have it in the past, but they're becoming big problems. But if you have girls engaging in underage sex or prostitution, if you run a campaign around child prostitution, it will not be gel as much because a prostitute is viewed negatively. Yeah, especially by family spouses who say, you're coming in and stealing my husband, you're a negative person. But the moment you turn it around and you say, then talk about sexual abuse, yeah, of children, and I'm looking at a 9-year-old girl, then I'm looking at my sister, I'm looking at my daughter, I'm looking at my niece, and I gel. So that kind of messaging you use is critical. How do you present it? Yeah, how do you get it around? I know their friends. There's a charity I work with that deals with animals. Again, won't say names, but I think for those who know it, I'll pick it up. They deal with donkeys. Donkeys are a critical thing in rural areas in many African countries. They carry water, yeah, over long distances. They help people move. Yeah, they carry many loads because you don't have cars. Yeah, but raising money for the donkey directly is extremely difficult because yes, the donkey is important, but do you prioritize an orphan, a widow, a poor person, a person living with disabilities, or a donkey? But if you present the donkey, I mean, if you talk about the need then to help this girl go to school through the donkey, because the donkey carries more water. So if her mom has the donkey, her mom does not have to take her out 10 kilometers out or 15 kilometers out to look for water. Yeah. If you mention the fact that maybe the donkey is what allows them generate more income by carrying. Yeah. So you have to be very smart on how you market things. Yeah. So I think for anyone coming in from that Western thing, yeah, and let me mention one more thing before Lucy comes in. The issue of the dog, because we all have dogs. In Africa, our mindset is dogs are there to guard us. So we love our dogs, but our dogs sleep outside because their job is to bark and alert us that there's danger coming in. Yeah, but a lot of our Western counterparts, people of European or American descent, then the dog is more of a pet. So the dog will have a nice place in the house, a nice bed it can. Yeah. So if you come in and this is actually even based on a case story I had in the Kenyan coast, Malindi, many years ago in the 80s, where you had these 2 families quarreling because the European family wanted the dog to stay in the house and the African didn't see, then if it's in the house, why do I have it? Yeah. So those cultural differences, yeah, I want the dog looked after. Yes. If you feed it well, keep it well done, get medical things. So it's outside, but it does not mean that you mistreat it. You can still get your message across. Yeah. So if you're going to come in with a course and you're targeting the heart and you're looking the way we give, a lot of the Western way of thinking and approaches don't work. Yeah. And as Lucy comes in, I think I lied, Lydia. Let me say one other thing out of it. Again, coming down to the crowdfunding. Yeah. Yes, mobile money is big, but mobile money is simply us going digital in the way we have always given. So Mike does not have to physically come to a town hall for a fundraiser and give. I can send my money by mobile phone. I can send my messages through social media. Yeah. So it has helped us and it has helped us become more efficient because we can give as little as 10 US cents. We can give thousands of dollars using mobile money. We can bank it into your account through mobile money. So it has built on what's already there. It's not that the way crowdfunding comes is perceived in Europe or in the US, yeah, where you're starting off with a whole new crowd. No, it's simply making those relationships more efficient.
It's interesting when you ask me that question, the thing that occurs to me is, because I live in London, and I've lived in the UK for nearly 30 years now, is the similarities between the US and Africa that other parts of the world, like Europe, do not share as much. So for instance, in Africa, as in the US, there really is an expectation that if you have, you give. And I mean, I remember growing up in Philadelphia and knowing that it was socially unacceptable if you had anything to not be generous. It was just not done, as my mother would have said. And the other thing is that there is a real sense of community in terms of American giving, US giving, I mean, specifically. People do, on average, give locally. They give very locally, or they give regionally. That's typical US behavior, also typical African behavior, if you can generalize across the continent. So I think it's interesting. They have a lot in common, but as Mike said, how you message it is critical, and an understanding of the culture and context and the individual or the organization is vital. I think that there is a huge emphasis, especially on the high end now, with data. And so most major foundations and very sophisticated major donors will be asking for a lot of data in terms of what impact you have. They will want to see your theory of change. They will want to see the evidence of your impact on the ground. They will want to see numbers, case studies, lots of detail. Whereas perhaps arguably, but I think this is changing among the major donors in Africa, there would be more of a purely emotional response, as Mike was suggesting. But that said, there are a growing number of networks on the continent of people who are pooling their knowledge and learning from each other in terms of their own philanthropy. And many of them are moving more in the direction of data and impact measurement and SDG impact measurement. So although it's absolutely right that you have to understand the culture and the context, you have to get your messaging right, but I think increasingly you also have to have the evidence to show to the donors about the impact you're having.
Again, the push, the importance of personalities. I think there's that biblical saying that says, to those who have more will be given. To those who don't, even the little they have will be taken away. And in Africa, those big personalities, I mean, the well-known people in business, in politics, who raise huge amounts of money within a very short time, while those who are less known then have problems getting money. So if you're going to do a fundraiser and you brought in a big political figure, like a president or a deputy president or a cabinet minister, yeah, or a famous business person, yeah, you're likely, or an important religious leader, you'll attract more money. And in fact, most of the time is they attract more money than they need within an extremely short time. So the person you use for leverage becomes important, because again, when people are giving, there'll be other things that sometimes come in. Sometimes, again, it's still giving to people, but there's a belief, especially when you're dealing with, like, let's say, a first lady, is there's a feeling that a company or an individual, then next time I also need to do something, yeah, they will remember I gave, and that will help. But you've seen then too, especially when you're looking at individual giving, yeah, politicians and the religious organizations are the ones that have really perfected that, yeah, in being able then to reach out with messages. Nonprofits are learning to do it, other than CBOs that traditionally have done it. Nonprofits are learning to do it and developing techniques, but it is very different from what they've been used to doing over a period of time. Yeah. So again, a lot of similarities, a number of similarities with what would happen in North America, like Lucy says. Yeah, but good to remember then it has to be targeted.
Excellent, thank you. So we have less than 10 minutes left. So it would be lovely if, as a parting gift to the participants, you could both share some of your top 3 or 5 tips of moving forward if they want to be fundraising in Africa for North America or vice versa. Lucy, do you want to go ahead first?
Sure, yeah. Well, first of all, I will put a set of resources up on the Chapel in York Connect web link. I'm sure Ligia will explain that. So that will be books and references and web links. If you want to learn more about African philanthropy, especially at the high end, that might be quite useful for you. But I think what I'd like to do to wrap up is to say that from what I've observed, major donors from Africa, as Mike said, give one-off gifts for specific projects. They often are driven by a personal connection, either a person or a cause that is very close to their heart. Many gifts, just like everyone everywhere else in the world, are driven by prestige, connections and associations, either with the cause itself or with people who are associated with the cause. They often will give just because someone they respect as a peer or an aspirational peer has asked them in person. And Mike mentioned that companies often are giving for particular reasons. Many companies in Africa are seeking license to operate both in their own countries and elsewhere around the world. And so a lot of community giving, both in their own areas and elsewhere, are driven by that sort of wider interest in maintaining a license to operate as a good citizen, as a company. In terms of what they give to, if you are fundraising for higher ed and you work for a high prestige university, yes, it's worth going for it, especially if you can establish a personal link, either with individuals or with a subject matter that your university is particularly known for. Health, especially cancer, specific prestige arts and culture projects, and faith-based is another thing to explore. And finally, I think increasingly major donors are very interested in participating in the global dialogue. And therefore, if your organization has something to do with the global dialogue, be it very relevant right now, democracy, development, or maintenance or sustenance, then you may be in with a shot if you do your research well. I think that it's really, really important to do your research, and that should be done on your desk, but also trying to find your own network on the continent, because there is nothing better than knowing people on the ground who know their territory. And finally, working with others in partnership, either other organizations in your same space or with others dealing with or affecting the ecosystem in which you are trying to have an impact, so that you can argue to the donors that giving to you, they will be leveraging further impact in what they're trying to change. And I think that's it for me. It's been a pleasure, I must say, especially talking to Mike, from whom we can all learn so much. He's got such broad experience. And I think you've been to 47 countries out of 54, which I find personally incredibly impressive.
Indeed. Mike, we have 4 minutes left. So what are your top 3 takeaways in 3 minutes?
In 3 minutes. The first is the perception, because for us in Africa, anything Western means rich. So the way we are socialized means that North America, in this case, you're talking about North America's rich continent. And reminds me a trip I made with someone some years ago I think it was 2010, and we were in New York. And this poor person moved up to him asking for a donation, a few coins. And he turned to me and he was shocked. I mean, he couldn't believe it. And he asked me, Mike, is this guy normal? Because he could see skyscrapers and he could not believe that in a country with so much wealth and abundance, you'd be asking for money. So many of us, if you're outside this continent, you're not appreciated. But when we leave this continent and we go to the US, we go to North America in general, Canada, and we believe it's the land of plenty. And that is going to be critical to your strategy. You're going to be asking people who believe you're coming from the land of milk and honey, of gold for money, you'll need to create a very strong case that actually shows there are poor people here who need support. So you need to come up with a very strong message to be able to communicate, which comes down to start thinking through your concept carefully. So in your concept, you'll be looking at issues of your cause, the targets you're looking at, your messaging, because the way you present it will determine how you're able to connect with your potential donors, who you're targeting. Remember, it's a diverse continent. Are you targeting the people in South Africa, many of whom might be Western in approach? Are you targeting companies? Are you targeting individuals? And so on. Secondly, is the issue of time. You need to give it time to grow. If you're in a hurry, the first campaign might not do much, but you develop roots like the bamboo. So later on when you come, you can give to them. And the last one, I'll say again, Africans like giving through fun. So if you're fundraisers that have fun in them, or you're using friends networks, again, that use peer pressure, or campaigns that have very strong messaging, that will help. Lastly, the diaspora in those countries. We've got a lot of Africans living in the US. Those are the people you should be asking them to also help you fundraise from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those are fantastic takeaways, and really appreciate Lucy, Mike. Thank you for your wealth of knowledge and your eagerness to share all of this with us today. Thank you to all of you who participate in this session. We wish you much luck and success, and enjoy the rest of this wonderful IFAB online conference. Thank you.